What is going on, Junkie Nation? Gorgeous George and Goes are back with another superstar from the sport of mixed martial arts, former MMA fighter Dan Hardy, and now color commentator for the PFL. Joins us here on the program. We're going to talk about PFL 10 2023, the World Championships. It's a pay per view, and ESPN Plus has got you covered. 6 title fights and a lot of key fights, some free agent signing fights, some high profile fights. It's going to be a banger of a card. Did I use that right, Dan? It's a banger, right?
Banger, a banger. Very good.
Thanks for joining us here on MMA Junkie Radio. Always a pleasure to have you on.
No worries. It's been a while. It's always good talking to you guys.
I feel like we're talking to you're getting inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or something like that, man. I don't think I've seen a cooler setup than what you got going on there. You got the shades going on, the backdrop. Love it.
Thanks, man. Yeah, this is the home studio. This is where I filmed the War Room and the podcast and stuff. And it's yeah. So I wallpapered the room with Judge Dredd comics, and then I covered it with action figures, and it goes a decent way up. I've got a good collection in here. It's quite the sight. Unfortunately, you only see a small fraction of it on the YouTube channel though.
We haven't talked to you in a while. I remember back in the day, you used to do it on the couch.
Absolutely, and I've still got that in the other room as well. I need to bring it back in at some point. It's currently covered with boxing gloves and pads. It needs tidying at the moment.
Let's give a quick plug to your skills. What would you say is different about your ability to preview a fight versus all of the other options that are out there nowadays with YouTube, podcasting? You know, there's a lot of people that break down fights, but obviously you've done it for a long time. You're highly respected, but for maybe an audience that is hearing about this for the first time, what do you appreciate about your angle to the fight game?
I don't know really. I mean, there are a lot of people out there that do really, really good work, and I honestly try not to watch them because I just don't want to be, repeating the same things that they say. I want to make sure that, whatever I'm seeing is coming from me and from what I'm recognizing. I don't know, to be honest. I'm not sure. I think everybody's got different voices, and I think different audiences like different people, different versions. I mean, Robin Black is high intensity. He hits you with a whole bunch of information straight away. Luke Thomas is very paced, and he kind of he steps things through very well. And I don't know. I think people have got different choices and different tastes. What I like to break it down from the perspective of me as the fighter. And I think that's kind of how I always did it. My intention was never to be an analyst or commentator. My drive was always to be the best fighter I could be. So, when that kind of came to a standstill and I crossed over into something else, I applied the same skills that I used at the start of training camps to break down fights that were happening. The difference was if I was removing myself from the equation, which it made me realize it gave me a much clearer view of the fights and a much less biased perspective. Like, no, it's all right. I'll just knock this guy out again. So I don't know. I mean, it all kind of, I stumbled upon it, you could say. It wasn't really intentional. And I don't really know exactly what it is about my breakdowns that people like. I just kind of hope that I put it in a way, in terms that people can understand, even if they've not ever stepped foot onto a mat or into a cage. To make it as accessible for people as possible, because that's really where the fan base grows, right? When people understand what they're watching and they have that new level of appreciation for what the people are doing in there. So that's really my goal, is to kind of make it more accessible.
Let's start with the main event. You have the traditional striker versus grappler. Clay Collard would love all 25 minutes on the feet, slinging them dogs. And OAM probably wants to lock up against the cage, maybe get the fight to the ground. So when you do start your breakdowns, do you almost start with, well, that's almost the obvious. What are their secondary talents, or do you go by weaknesses? How do you dive into like a fight like this one?
Well, I like to watch their fights through in order. I like to see how they've evolved as fighters and try and take into account other things that have been, beneficial in their journey. Certain places where they've trained, certain people they've trained with, other experience. Like Clay Collard, of course, had experience in professional boxing as well when he wasn't able to get matched in mixed martial arts, and that was a good confidence booster. That really varied his striking skill set, I would say, and gave him more composure in the pocket. So you can draw on a lot of different things. And, I agree with what you're saying to a point, but OAM's a very smart and very strategic fighter. So I don't think he's going to waste too much energy in the opening rounds until he's got a good read on what Collard's going to do. I think he's going to try and take away the lead leg of Collard because, he's a front foot fighter and he likes to push forward. The thing I like about Collard is the way that he attacks the body. You saw it against Shane Burgos. He smashes hooks into the rib cage and makes people drop their arms. And it's that overwhelming kind of, it's such a high pressure style that it's kind of like the way Sean Strickland is able to overcome strikers that are more technical. It's the blunt force attack. Putting yourself in the pocket and hitting many targets. And I think that's what Clay Collard does really well, which is why I feel like OAM's probably going to try and, counter strike on the back foot and take away that lead leg a little bit.
We've talked to both guys, and Collard shared a story with us where backstage somewhere, maybe before a weigh-in or something like that, they were joking and talking, and he was really amped up, couldn't wait for that moment. He's just all into fight week. And OAM told him, man, we're the opposite. I absolutely hate this. He clarified that he does love the purity of the fight itself, but interviews, fight week, playing up to the crowd, it's just not him. Which is either one? Have you ever noticed over the years of accumulation of studying tape, is either one of the two the better approach, getting amped up or staying calm?
Honestly, I think it depends on the fighter. I've been around fighters, I've cornered fighters that, like Paul Daly in the early days, he used to love to get hyped up. Him and Andre Winner, they would hype each other up. They would be bouncing as they came out the dressing room down the corridor. And I tried that in my early couple of fights and it just didn't work for me. I had Pantera cranked up. I knew it would get me fired up and it just didn't work out for me. I wasn't able to pace myself very well. I wasn't able to control my emotions and direct them in the same way that they could. For me, I was far more, in my own head, kind of thinking about the fight, keeping quite a mellow, mood up until the point when the curtains open. And the moment when I'm walking out to the cage is when I'm kind of, I don't know, I step into a different character at that point, and then all of that energy and attention is additional fuel for my performance. But I have to manage it very carefully. It didn't always work out. Like, of course, UFC 120 when Carlos Condit knocked me out cold. Like that was me being too excitable, too energetic, and too kind of let's bang and see who falls over first, which was, of course, foolish and didn't work out very well for me.
Mm-hmm. I can't wait for that fight, honestly, and it'll be interesting to see if Collard can keep the fight to the ground. On the feet, or at least mitigate the damage that OAM can do, whether it's against the cage or on top. Very similar, almost to what we saw with Lewis and Almeida in Brazil this past weekend. I found it pretty compelling and interesting, but I could understand a lot of fans. They want blood. They want, more. But let's talk about Fajeda versus Goltsov, the heavyweight matchup. This could be a $3 million fight, Dan, if you think about it, because the winner gets $1 million. And I don't see there must be two options for the PFL going forward for Ngannou in 2024. I would imagine the champion is going to have a say possibly in being that opponent. Would you not agree?
Yeah, I mean, they would be a clear option for us. And I think both of them are interesting problems for Ngannou, especially with Goltsov and his experience. He's got great footwork. He's got great boxing skills. I mean, probably the best jab in mixed martial arts, certainly in the heavyweight divisions. I think he's very problematic, especially given the fact that he's got the ground game to match if he chooses to use it. And then for Hader, I mean, his nickname kind of says it all. He's problematic on a multitude of levels. Now he's working at ATT. His ground game, his grappling skills are on the rise. That's going to give him confidence in his striking. And just the size and the reach of the individual, his ability to cover distance with accurate strikes as well, whether it's kicks or punches. They're both very, very dangerous individuals. And honestly, like we could run this heavyweight fight back a few times and we could get very different results each time. I think both of them are good contenders for Ngannou in the future, but certainly the one that wins is most likely going to be the front runner.
And would you not say that the winner is a problem for Ngannou? I mean, a lot of people think that Ngannou just smashes. Don Davis said something controversial. I wish I could follow up with him at some point, but he just felt like there might not be an interesting fight for him. And I don't know if he meant to subtly diminish maybe his heavyweight stable, or if he's so focused on Wilder, he's already maybe, making a move towards possibly putting that fight together. Who knows? But look, PFL has a good record of sending a lot of free agents packing that have come over from either UFC or Bellator or whatever. What would you say to those that might think that maybe the PFL doesn't have a heavyweight that can hang with Ngannou?
I mean, I think both of those guys are good options. They've both got the skills and the credentials and the experience to be able to step in there with Ngannou. Like this, you just can't say that at heavyweight. I mean, what have we learned about the featherweights this year? You know, you've got Braga and Pinedo have come in and absolutely blown everybody else out of the water, and that's including 3 former champions and contenders for the title. Like you just can't count people out. And I think that's the beauty of the PFL format, is that it opens the door to people that have maybe not, like, did Pinedo earn a shot immediately at Brendan Loughnane? In a different promotion, that wouldn't have happened. But it did happen because of the PFL format. And he proved to us that, you can score the upset and win big. And it's not like it was an accident. I mean, both him and Braga have done it consistently now, and they find themselves in the championship. And I think that's even more applicable at heavyweight. Like you see what Ngannou just did to Tyson Fury. You can't tell me that a heavyweight like Goltsov or Fajeda couldn't come in against Ngannou in a mixed martial arts fight and cause the same kind of upset. Like I definitely think they could, and I think they're both intriguing matchups. The heavyweight division especially can just turn on a single punch, and I think both of those guys have got the potential to land that single punch.
Dan, it's funny George brings up free agents, because that's kind of where I wanted to go. With Derek Brunson here with the PFL now, and he's got Ray Cooper III in front of him, an established PFL veteran. Is this kind of the best case scenario for a guy like Derek Brunson? Because we often talk about guys that come into the PFL and they're caught by surprise by the season format. How about him just getting in there and maybe getting out the fact that he's been with a company for so long, just different cage, different environment, different staff, getting that all out of the way before he embarks on this new journey of a season?
I think sometimes it's just a fresh place, really just kind of shake people up. It gives them a new sense of motivation. And Derek Brunson is an awkward and talented individual, and I think he's problematic for anybody, no matter what weight class he's in. Like, we know what Ray Cooper can do. He puts people away with either hand. And I think this is just a really fun fight. This for me is kind of like the treat on the card. Like, we've got a lot of interesting fights on the card, and of course a lot of money and titles on the card. But as far as the fights that I'm most interested in, like what is going to happen in this fight, that's what you've got here. And I think, for Derek Brunson, with the skills that he brings to the table, it could make for quite a chaotic fight. I mean, I was commentating when he fought Rob Whittaker, and that was absolutely wild while it lasted. I could see this fight being very similar.
Dan, all these fighters, when they come to the PFL, they give us different answers when we ask them, what have you done? Who have you asked for advice as far as the season goes and all that? Because it's a different beast, and we hear it over and over from fighters the following year who usually say, well, I took it lightly the first year, but now I'm going to. And we talked to Derek and we kind of said, what are you going to do to avoid that situation where you come back and say, I should have maybe paid a little bit more attention? What would you do? Like, if you were in one of these guys' corner, how would you prepare them for what they're about to experience in the PFL? Because it is very, very different.
Absolutely, it is. I mean, of course, you've got to do a lot of your foundational work before the season starts, because once you hit the ground, you've got to be running, and you've got to be ready to keep running. So a lot of the work has to be done beforehand. I think when the season starts, You've got to manage yourself very well. You've got to be honest. If if you're bruised, if you're injured, coming out of one fight, you need to make sure that healing is your priority. And then you kind of have to do the training that you can before the next fight comes up. I mean, it's a part of the challenge of the format. Someone like Derek Brunson, who competed for a long time in wrestling, will understand this process, much better than most anyway. But it's a case of just kind of being honest with yourself and not pushing too much. A lot of fighters, from what I can tell, is they give too much in the first 2 fights of the season. They really push themselves through training camp, maybe spar too much hard sparring, and then by the time the playoffs arrive, they're so bruised up that they just don't feel like they're moving quite as well. But everybody's in the same boat. That's a part of the challenge of this format. And I think that the fighters that are going at it a second time around, they usually have a bit more of an advantage because they understand the pacing a little bit better.
Dan, is there anybody out there in mixed martial arts that you can point to that kind of reminds yourself a little bit of yourself, of how you were competing, whether it be the way they fight or the way they carry themselves? Like, I guess my question is, who's the new you?
Hopefully there isn't one. I mean, I think one of me was more than enough. Perhaps too many, in fact. I don't know, to be honest. I mean, I'm not really sure. You guys can probably tell me better what I represented in MMA. I mean, hopefully it was it was an adrenaline rush for the fans. I think one thing I will say is I think and I think Bruce Buffer will back me up on this. I'm pretty sure I'm one of the first that was interacting with Bruce Buffer in the face-offs. Bruce often mentioned that to me when I would see him. So excitement and adrenaline. I hope I brought that to the table, and I hope people knew that no matter whether the fight was going my way or not, I was thoroughly enjoying myself for their benefit. I don't know. I mean, I think there are a lot of fighters that represent that now. I mean, just on the PFL roster, I think Brendan Loughnane is a good example, right? Picks himself up, dusts himself off. We live and learn. We get back to the gym and we keep going. And he's met loads of adversity over the years. He didn't have the easiest run to the to a world championship with doubt and with setbacks and stuff. And I like to feel like he's got that indomitable spirit that I always try to represent as well.
I think I got one goes and Dan. There's some similarities, not from the look and fashion side, because like I told you earlier, you have a cool swag to you. Back in the day, whether it was the mohawk, your look or whatever, but you were never really like, a lot of Brits that come off that like a Lee Murray back in the day or a Michael Bisping, get in your face. I mean, I'm pretty sure you don't back down from anyone, but it was this subtle, confident swag. You know who's got that? Is Tom Aspinall. Every once in a while, you put a mic in front of him, and at the right time, he'll kind of say, "Oh, we can have a go if you'd like," but then he kind of laughs it off or whatever. So just enough to tell you, I'm an ass whooper, in case anyone forgot that. But at the same time, he has a pleasant conversation and a great vocabulary like yourself. I think we just need to maybe, you probably have the contacts in London, right? Send them to somebody to get him some cool spectacles like you know what I mean? And a little bit of fashion. Hopefully he doesn't beat me up for that one, but you know what I'm talking about?
That's a huge compliment for me. I'm a big fan of Tom Aspinall. He's a very, very dangerous individual. But I agree. Carries himself with that kind of quiet confidence. He's got a real presence, but it's not at all forced. He actually reminds me a lot of Frank Mir. Back in the day, not only the way that he looks, but like when Frank Mir walks into a room, people are like, okay, well, that guy, whether he's armed or not, which he probably is, whether he's armed or not, he's a very dangerous individual, but I don't feel threatened by him, if that makes sense. Like, you know what I mean? There's something quite comforting about the presence as well. I spent a lot of time training with Frank Mir, and it was a really good training partner, sparring partner, and a friend. And Tom Aspinall's got that same kind of energy about him. So yeah, no, I take that as a compliment. I was probably a little bit more punk rock than Tom.
Yeah.
But that's maybe something Tom can work on once he's got the heavyweight strap.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, let's do one more fight. And since we still have about 3 weeks, folks, before this epic event, PFL 10, the World Championships. We'll see if we can get Dan on and cover the other 3 fights and whatever else is left. But I think you may have teased Braga versus Pineda. Is that one of the ones you're looking forward to the most, if not the most? Because you were talking about the heavyweights, but you were citing some examples from these other 2 guys and what they've been able to do. But tell us a little bit more about this one. Is this the show stealer, maybe?
That is, honestly, I think it is. Yeah, that's the one I'm most excited about. Just because, I mean, both of these kids have come in, with a real intensity about them, and they've just proven themselves to be top flight competitors. They are 2 of the best in the world right now, and I think they're going to prove that in this championship bout. Like, especially because we've already got a fight between them, right? It was a 3-round fight. You saw Braga smash Pinedo's lead leg. He really started to destabilize his base. And then there was a turning point. I don't know exactly when it was, halfway through the second round, where you just kind of started to see Pinedo go, no, not today. And he just started to sprint at him with like ferocious punching combinations and knees up the center line. And I think both of them left that fight thinking to themselves, I could have done a little bit more and I could have made this a far clearer victory for myself. And then you've got to take into account this has got an extra 10 minutes on the end of it. We've got championship rounds. Yeah. I think these 2 are going to take absolute chunks out of one another. I think they're going to be smiling while they do it. And I think that the fans are going to be on their feet by the time the fight's over.
I'm actually in Peru right now. If I was in Lima, I'd try and visit the gym if Pineda was still there. But I'm just so impressed over the way he conducts himself. Like, he just walks you down, but in a real menacing way. Has anyone ever done that to you where it mind fucked you for maybe just a minute or 2 until you could figure out what was happening? Because at times you ever see Terminator 2 when that guy just wouldn't go away, the T-1000? It's like, what do we do? Like, how do we figure this thing out?
Yeah, no, I can't think of an opponent that was like that, but usually the bad dreams going into fight week felt a lot like that. Where you've got somebody just walking forward and you're hitting them with everything that you've got, and they just keep walking forward. He's got that same kind of intensity, and I feel like unless Braga's able to maintain some space between him and establish that nice steady striking pace, he might find himself being walked down for the best part of 25 minutes. I'm a big fan of both of them. It's a shame one of them has to lose in the championship bout, but I expect him to circle it back, and we'll have a good rivalry between these 2 guys going into 2024.
Can't wait for it. Can't wait for PFL 10, folks. It's the day after Thanksgiving, Black Friday. You got to get this pay-per-view, 6 title fights and a lot of key fights that you can watch on the prelims early on, including Derek Brunson coming over from the UFC, fighting Ray Cooper III, a former champion. That should be a pretty great fight to get the night started. Dan, thanks so much for staying up past midnight to do this interview. And again, if we can get with you again and maybe do a part 2 and shore up some of the other fights, that'd be great.
Sounds good. Anytime, guys. Always a pleasure talking to you.
You too, sir. Take care.